Every game, every side, every total. It's NFL week number 10, and this is the week 10 live stream preview here on the RAS Picks YouTube channel. We'll talk about everything on the board and give you the best information that you need to know going into week 10 before you make your bets. Good to be back with so many folks in the live chat. The numbers are going to populate as we get going. It's a busy Wednesday morning. There's a lot going on, and I'm going to put a bit of a precursor to the show in saying that I'm down about 30 hours of prep this week. And obviously, that's not full 30 hours sitting at the desk watching everything. But Monday was a complete write-off here, unfortunately, with the big storm. And so it's a little bit behind trying to catch up over the week. So this is probably, in terms of like depth of going into detail for every game, maybe one of the lighter shows we've ever done here on the Wednesday live stream preview. So bear with me. I thought last week, the comment section down below with the pinned comment, for putting in updates as the week went on. A couple bets got put in there as well. I thought that worked great. And so going to keep on doing that. So if you are watching the show and you're coming back Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, be sure to check in the pinned comment. I'll be updating that every day the rest of the week with anything that comes up and anything that I think is useful. So it's a group effort here on the week 10 preview show, and appreciate everybody coming in. Be sure to get your comments into the live chat as we get going. Good to say some hellos to Rich, who was in bright and early. Glad to hear you weathered the storm. It was ugly. I haven't seen wind like that in a very, very long time. So that was a big one. Michael's pumped about a bit of everything. The train repositioned itself on the track. Last week was absolutely a needed bounce back. It wasn't lights out by any means. That Titans push was just a killer. But it was a good bounce back week for sure. Jeff says, good morning. Good to be back. Anthony, I got news for you. Look at this thing. Cost $78 probably at Starbucks. The Venti iced shaken espresso. That is a Dan Campbell somewhere has already drank two of these, and it's 11 o'clock out his way. I'm just getting into sip number one, but I'll try to have a sip prior to the 35-minute mark. I think it's a good over-under. Nice total that you set, but the hot coffee versus the iced coffee was incorrect. Logan is listening for the first time. He's excited about it. Good to have you on the live stream as well, Logan. Scott, we'll get to favorite teasers in a little bit. I believe I'm saying it's Rajon, if I'm getting it right. Pardon me if I'm not. I've heard you reference Matty P picks you make. How can I tune in? That is Sam P. Those just get posted on Twitter. It's a weekly show that I do. It's one pick. We talk about a couple topics. I usually retweet it, so you can check out the Twitter feed as well. Good to see Ryan Roberts as well. Rich is pointing out the new microphone. Good to see you. Devin Barth in for another show. Sean, NB, Moonfish. Can the Ravens bottle Sunday's effort? I think so. We'll talk about that in just a second as we get to it. Another hello to Mike, Joe, Anthony equals cold coffee equals money. I hope so as well. Went back to iced coffee today too. 75 degrees for Devin Barth back there as well. Mike S., it is like a dark green, I guess. That's what I got to say about the back wall color. All right. Not going to do much delay anymore. Let's get to it. Cincinnati on the road at the Baltimore Ravens. Ravens a 6-point favorite across the board with a total of 53. I think the side is priced right. I think the total is priced right. I don't have a lot to say on this game. I do like Keaton Mitchell anytime touchdown score at plus 500. I would play that down to the FanDuel price of plus 460. It is expected that he is going to be back in the game. And although it's a 3 running back role share, and pro prop bettors are probably going to look at that play and call it out as being square, rightfully so, I can't ignore arguably a top 5 most explosive player in the league coming back at a price that long, as good as Derrick Henry has been. You're giving me reps with Keaton Mitchell out of that backfield in a game where Isaiah likely less than 100%. I'm going to take a flyer on that one in his potential return. And if he doesn't end up playing and they hold him out for another week, so be it. I'm going to take a chance with that one and look at that. I think that he is going to play a big role in this offense when called upon, and is just an incredible changeup for the Ravens to add back into their offense that is already trending at a historically great level. And so I'm going to call that out as something for this game specifically. But nothing for me here on the side nor the total. I look at this, and it's obviously an all-in spot for Cincinnati. They desperately need this game to keep their playoff hopes at least active. And it's going to be driven by the offense. We are seeing a defense for Cincinnati, albeit rebound a little bit in the last couple of weeks when guys have got healthy, but this is just a completely different neighborhood for challenge. This is not the Raiders, who the Bengals held to 3.7 yards per play. This is not the Cleveland Browns going through quarterback turmoil and injuries all over the place that the Bengals held to 4.4 yards per play. And this is not the Giants with Daniel Jones that the Bengals held to 4.2 yards per play. Every time that the Bengals have stepped up and faced a semi-competent offense, it's been ugly. The Eagles, just 2 weeks ago, nearly 7 yards a play, one of their best outputs of the entire season. And in the first game, which was pretty big sellout from Cincinnati against the Ravens, they still allowed the Ravens to go up and down the field for 6.5 yards per play and 440 yards of offense. And this Ravens offense is only getting better week by week. And I think the Ravens move the ball at will here. And so if this is going to be on the shoulders of the Cincinnati offense, you start to wonder just how big that absence of T. Higgins is going to be yet again. Even last week against the Raiders, although the scoreboard has him 41 points, it was 5.3 yards per play. It was fairly pedestrian without T. Higgins. Burrow, 5 touchdowns. I'm not taking away from that, but the offense just isn't the same without Higgins on the field, is the point that I'm trying to make. And in a game of this magnitude, if he's not able to play, as rough as the Ravens defense has been relative to past Ravens defensive years, I think that's a problem for Cincinnati if you're needing them to come back and keep it within the number. And so I don't have a lot on this game. I'm going to throw out that prop. I'm going to sit with that. And that's really all I have for this game of any interest or any intrigue. We've seen the number from 6.5 get bet down as low as 5.5. At 5.5, there was resistance. This total at 53 is in somewhat of rare air when you consider that there has been just over 50 Thursday games that have had totals higher than 51. Those have skewed under in a major way. 62% of those games have gone under on those short week high totals. I just don't want to get in and back an under on two of the biggest over teams in the league as high as this total might be. So it is just a stay away from me. Changing 500 says, would you look to ball to more at 5.5? I don't think we see it again, perhaps, but I don't think it comes back on the board. But if it did, I would be intrigued by it for sure. So that is just to move on to the next game, simply put. Now, the New York Giants on the road in Germany, as is Carolina, is a game that I'm having a lot of trouble figuring out. So we have some internal numbers on this game. Couple sources we look at make this game 8.5. Couple make it 5. We're split between at 6. It's been one way on the Giants all week. I don't particularly know what to make of this. If I just think about the matchups on the field, the Giants' run game with Tracy should get whatever it wants against this Panthers defense, especially this front seven, which has just been pushed around. Even as it has become healthier, there's just been no resistance against opposing offenses. And if that is the case for the Giants, Brian Daboll's going to kind of get what he wants in this game. As we saw last week, he didn't want Daniel Jones to throw the football. He was content with the run game and how effective it was in the first half, even though they only scored 7 points and were down 2 scores. He was doing interviews coming out of the tunnel saying that he was content with it. And I think about if the Giants are forced into that this week, I think it probably works against Carolina. Now, do you want to take a neutral field team laying 6 that just hasn't gone out and won by margin all season, that wants to run the football as bad as the Panthers defense might be? It's not necessarily a recipe for success. When you think about the games the Giants have won, they have the one win that went outside of margin against the Seattle Seahawks. But other than that, it's been tight all season long against a lot of mediocre teams on the other side too. And so there is a level of inexperience, I would say, when you think about the young staff for Carolina, likely Bryce Young starting again at quarterback. So that could be something that works in favor of the Giants in this spot. It's just getting to a number now that for me is tough to justify. But man, with the way the Panthers are handling their depth chart at the moment, I just wonder if there's something else going on behind the scenes that is not being talked about, because they have had a handful of guys on offense and defense who have both been eligible to return. They were dealing with IR stints or injuries. And I thought it was driven by the trade deadline. I thought this was the Panthers holding guys out because they were going to be active movers yesterday at the deadline. And they really weren't. And so now there's commentary in early week pressers that are saying guys might return this week if they're able to come back this week. I feel like we've been talking about the return of Brooks for a month now. The same thing with Thielen, since he's been practicing now for a while. There's guys on the defensive side who seem like they have been eligible to return for a couple of weeks, and they're just not pushing anybody back. I don't know what would change in a Germany week, potentially a lot. I don't know what's happening behind the scenes with the Panthers. And the way that this game has been bet so far makes me think that there's something going on in terms of how the personnel is being handled. It's just been one way on the Giants, who have done nothing really to justify being bet like this. And I can't make a whole lot of sense of it. And so I don't have the answer for this one. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know on this one. And that's not something that I typically say, but I don't know. Buffalo -4 on the road at the Indianapolis Colts. This is a total, which we released under earlier in the week at a better number than 46.5. Won't go too much into detail on that. I will talk about the side here with the Bills laying 4 points. So I like the Colts here getting 4. It was not enough to justify a release, and there was a little bit of movement on the side earlier in the week. It was a messy week for releases. There were 2 or 3 spots where releases were identified, wanted to push them out. There was movement. One release got jumped between the warning and the release. So that was kind of messy. But I do like the Colts here getting 4 points at home. Tough spot for the Bills. You just think scheduling-wise, big game against the Dolphins last week. Make the road trip to face the Colts this week. And then on deck, they had the big game back at home against the Kansas City Chiefs, which has massive AFC implications. And so I do think that is a bit of a negative for the Bills. I think another negative for the Bills is that the offense is a little bit tight at the moment, and the Colts are not the team necessarily to allow things to open up for an offense. They play everything very soft, try to keep everything in front, and prevent those explosive plays. The big weakness for the Colts, while they dealt with a lot of injuries, was defending true wide receiver ones down the field. If I think about the Bills, there's uncertainty about Keon Coleman, who's emerged as the number 1 wide receiver. There's uncertainty about Amari Cooper, who was traded to come in and potentially be the number 1 wide receiver. The Bills' game against the Dolphins was everything short and underneath. There was not a lot of explosive plays being pushed downfield. And the way that the offense for Buffalo is operating right now, it just seems like a scheme fit for the Colts to maybe not be able to completely shut down and eliminate, but at least contain. And when I'm looking at a team and the Bills in this scheduling spot on the road needing to cover a number, contained offense versus explosive and breakout offense isn't what I would be comfortable backing and betting into. And I think that bodes well for the Colts. The Sunday night game against Minnesota, I think something that jumped out to me for the Colts certainly was the defensive line now back and healthy. It wasn't, again, a full shutdown effort of the Vikings offense, which does have the number 1 wide receiver weapon that the Bills may not for this game and this matchup, which gave the Colts a lot of trouble. That defensive line for Indy, now that it's healthy, makes a difference. I mean, there's some great talent up front. And against the Bills, who want to operate out of a bit of those heavier looks, run the football, keep things on the ground, this is now a Colts defensive line that can contend with that. And some of the numbers weeks 2 to 8 skew things a little bit differently. And I think this is a Colts defense that now just has a different look to it up front that is going to matter in this spot. Offensively for Indy, it was just brutal with Joe Flacco. I don't understand the game plan. I don't know what they were trying to do against Minnesota. This is the tough defense in Buffalo, who's very good at defending outside. This has to be Steichen getting back to the run game and targeting the spine of the Bills defense and attacking them up the middle. That's how he has to win. Having Joe Flacco drop back a ton and target these wide receivers against these Bills corners is a recipe for a bit of a disaster. And so this is a lot of pressure on Steichen, who kind of took ownership of the QB change, doubled down on it, and then completely laid an egg on Sunday Night Football when everybody was watching. A lot of pressure mounting on him. I'm not ready, as some of the comments are in some of the press conferences that he's doing to write him off. I think he's still a great play caller, and I think he shows it in this spot. So Colts here getting higher than the field goal at 4 is a spot that I like. We have got spam bots coming into the chat for the first time ever. Again, gonna throw out the ban in the chat. I haven't seen that before. I guess the show continues to grow and get some reach, so we've got some bots that are coming into the show as well. There's some questions about the Dolphins move. I'll have a comment on that. Ryan, the move from 4 to 6 on the Giants. Don't necessarily. Again, I don't know what's going on with that, so I'm not sure what's happening in that game. Sean, looks like you're looking at schematic matchups for this game. How much do you weigh that in your handicaps? An enormous amount, definitely. Every single game that I do, for sure. Gerard says, good morning. He's coming off a depressing Seahawks loss in overtime against the LA Rams on Sunday. Hopefully he's doing a little bit better. Ian, I do think the Colts are able to run the ball better this week. I think there's an emphasis on it. I know Taylor's less effective with Flacco than he is with Richardson. It's kind of a CFL thing. A lot of the mobile quarterbacks in the CFL do a great job of opening up the running backs out of the backfield, and that's something that's pretty well documented. It's a similar effect here with the Colts, where when you have Richardson and that threat of the run off the mesh point in the backfield, that frees up Taylor. When that's gone, obviously, with Flacco, you're in a spot where that makes the run game less effective. The Colts have to adjust here, and I do think we see the run game look more effective here against the Bills. Minnesota Vikings -5.5 with a total of 45 on the road at Jacksonville. I have no opinion here at all. And I have even less of an opinion now that we have the news this morning from Adam Schefter that Trevor Lawrence is dealing with an upper body injury. Apparently it's being reported like the NHL playoffs. Upper body injury, and his status for this game is uncertain. If this is not Trevor Lawrence and it is Mac Jones, I think we're looking at a true midweek adjustment, as there was just nothing openly reported about this injury coming out of last week. And so this was sitting around Minnesota 4. It's now up to 5.5. If this is Mac Jones starting for the Jags, this is 7 at a minimum, I would say. And so there's still movement to come. So you can look at this and potentially play it off from that perspective. I don't have an opinion or a take on this game. I really don't. And even less so with that injury news that has come up. In terms of numbers that we were looking at internally, Jags were set out in this game as a 4.1 point underdog, which is basically where that number was, with Lawrence expected to be in. There was nothing in terms of being able to bet it one side or the other, or any value that was being presented. The total in this game, which obviously would have included Lawrence being in, was 46.5. So again, we were right on market with this. There's just not a lot to say, but obviously that QB injury would have a lot of impact on this game. I don't have a lot to offer in this one. Pittsburgh on the road at the Washington Commanders. Commanders a 3-point favorite with a total of 45, 45.5 at some spots as well. This was as high as 46. We saw resistance come back the other way, and we're about a half point lower than the peak of what we saw for the total. If you're looking at Pittsburgh this morning, 3 -120. That would still be a bet for me. That is going opposite of the pro who released Washington -2.5 and pushed this up to 3. And the way that I look at this game is pretty straightforward. The Washington Commanders this season, they have not faced a defense that is at the caliber of the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is going to be a big step up for the Commanders offense in terms of opposing defense that they are facing. The Pittsburgh Steelers defense has not faced an offense that is at the caliber of the Washington Commanders offense. It is a big step up for the Pittsburgh Steelers defense facing an offense like this. So you have effectively the same handicap on either side. If you're betting on Washington, the overwhelming response as to why from just a subjective handicapping spot is going to say that the Pittsburgh Steelers defense is potentially phony and inflated. When you think about who the Steelers defense has played in week 1, it was Kirk Cousins coming off the Achilles in a odd Falcons offensive game plan. It was Bo Nix in his second game as a starter. It was Justin Herbert who was hurt in the second quarter. It was Indy who was going through the QB switch. It was the Dallas Cowboys, who we know offensively are a far cry from what they've been at any point in previous seasons. It was the Raiders, who again were going through a QB switch. It was the Jets with Rodgers first game with Adams and an offense desperately trying to figure anything out. And then it was Daniel Jones. And so you have just a run of offenses and quarterbacks that are incredibly ineffective and non-productive. And now you're stepping up to face the Commanders, who have been one of the best offenses in the league. In terms of Washington and the defenses that they have faced, well, the Bucs have been a complete letdown. The New York Giants ranks on the secondary side of things near the bottom of the league. Cincinnati in that game with so many injuries up front were just a disaster. Arizona has been in the bottom 7 for defense for the majority of the season. Cleveland is completely boomer bust, but in that game against the Browns, the Commanders got whatever they wanted. Baltimore is a defense that's taken a big step back, especially up front with the pressure rate. That's the one game where we've seen Washington struggle a little bit. And then Carolina, one of the worst defenses in the league. Chicago in a game where there's a lot of ulterior motives coming out from the locker room that's making that defense look a little bit different. And then it was the Giants again in a repeat where the Commanders got effectively whatever they wanted going up and down the field. And so both sides stepping up in a big way. To me, I think it's a bit of a write-off and a wash in both of those. I do think the unit that matters and makes a difference in this game is going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers offense. And you're putting them in a spot they know well as a road underdog. They're coming off of the bye where they have time to get things right and sort of figure things out with the switch to Russ. But in the 2 games with Russ, they've been north of 6 yards per play. And when I think about the big weakness for the Commanders all season, it's been their defense. And it's improved slightly the last couple of weeks. But I still look at this Commanders defense as one of the lower graded units in the league. And even with the addition of Lattimore, if he's able to go off of the hamstring, I think that's something that takes a bit of time to figure out and get right. And the Steelers are going to be able to run the ball. And so it's a Steelers team that plays into this road underdog role very well, that's going to have their run game. And it's a passing attack that should be able to get enough against this defense. And so to me, this is a spot here at 3 where I like Pittsburgh. And I do think the Steelers get bet between now and kickoff, and it comes off of the 3. Ryan Roberts says Lattimore make an impact. And so there's a chance that this plays out like the Adams trade, where Adams had the hamstring injury. He's traded to a better team. And it's like, oh, all of a sudden the hamstring is good. That could happen. It also might be a legitimate injury that keeps him out. We have to wait and see what comes of that. I think Washington trading for Lattimore was I'll call it the second best deal at the deadline yesterday that was made by any team. I think the best was Smith going to the Lions and filling that hole they have on the defensive line. And so I do think he makes an impact. It's something Washington desperately needs. Does it have an immediate impact this week? We'll see. But I do think it was a very good ad for Washington in the secondary. Next game up is the Atlanta Falcons, 3.5 even money with a total of 46.5 on the road, taking on the Saints. And so the big news in this game is the Saints with the firing of Dennis Allen. Rizzi comes in as the new head coach in the interim basis. He was the special teams coach. And this is the traditional spot. Have to bet the Saints here, plus 3.5, minus 120. And if I'm being transparent, we were going to play the total in this game at a higher price. This is the game that we set up with the release warning. Someone jumped it shortly after. The release warning went out at like 115. It was bet at like 124 across the board and came down. A lot of the reasons why, like the under, even though we're not playing it at 46.5, but would play the side, they cross over. And it's kind of a similar handicap for both the side and the total. And so with the side at 3.5, it's a price I'd play. One, you get the new coaching bump, which is a spot that I'm always looking to play anytime that it happens. And I think it's justifiable in this spot. If I go back to the Sunday night live stream, was talking about how big of a bump up this was for the Falcons and somewhat anticipating that you could see Dennis Allen fired. And eventually he was, as it turned out. And so I think, first of all, you see a number that's inflated up. Second, you have the coaching bump, positives for the Saints in this spot. What Rizzi has preached is what every interim head coach preaches, especially when they come from the special team side. It's effort, hustle, togetherness. He's already switched around the locker room to where he's bringing everybody into different spots. It's what you always see from these special team coaches that get promoted into the interim coaching role. I don't think he's looking at this as a spot where it's like Pierce was last season, where he's taking over and he's going to be the long-term hire for the Saints. I don't imagine that is the case. But what I think you're going to see in this game, in this one-game bump from the Saints, is a much better effort defensively. The big issue for the Saints all season has been stopping the run. They've been brutal against it, especially the outside zone stuff. With the added effort and emphasis, and now everybody no longer playing for Dennis Allen, who was kind of the defensive overseer, even though he was in the head coach, you get the refresh and the reset in that spot. And I think that matters for the Saints defense, especially against the Falcons, who are likely without Drake London for this game and are probably going to become more reliant on Bijan and Algier out of the backfield and those outside zone concepts. And so to me, that's a positive for the Saints. The other positive I see here for the Saints is that Derek Carr is going to be throwing from a clean pocket. The Falcons just don't generate a lot of pressure. And Derek Carr, even without Olave and even without Shaheed, if he's from a clean pocket, you're going to get production from him. And so home team with the new interim head coach, you get the motivation bump. You likely get a much better defensive effort, which has been lacking. You have a point spread that's inflated, and you have a quarterback that can work from a clean pocket that should do enough to generate some offense against the defense that doesn't have a lot of pass rush. I think there's a lot of positives here for the Saints at this number. So 3.5, if you see it at minus 120, still a bet this morning. Denver on the road at the Kansas City Chiefs. Chiefs are an 8-point favorite with a total of 41.5. I don't know what you can do in this spot with this number, because if you're looking at aggregate ratings, if you're looking at market ratings, and if you're looking at previous closes, specifically last week, you're seeing this number priced effectively correct. And what I say by that is you think about the Ravens. They closed minus 9.5, minus 10 against the Broncos. The Chiefs in every aggregate rating are about a point to a point and a half less than the Ravens compared to an average team. And when you're looking at market ratings, you get right back to this spot. And so it's tough for this number, in my opinion, to be anything else than what it is right now. If I'm making a case for Kansas City, it would be assuming that there's no limitations for Patrick Mahomes, which could have an impact on this number a little bit. So you're thinking that 8 is the floor. But the argument for the Chiefs here is that we've seen the Broncos step up in class effectively once all season, and it was last week, and the Ravens hung 41 points on them with ease and held them to 10 and no points past the 2-minute remaining mark in the second quarter. And so the Chiefs have a better defense than the Ravens, which likely makes things less optimistic for the outlook of the Broncos offense. The Chiefs have a better run defense than the Ravens, which is what the Broncos want to do on offense. And you're just expecting the Chiefs offense to do enough with a great defensive effort. I could completely buy into that case. Now, if you're making the case for the Denver Broncos, you're saying that the Broncos had 4 or 5 drives that I would label as near misses deep in the red zone against the Ravens that they did not convert into points. Multiple times got inside the 5 and were backed up with penalties or mistakes that caused those drives to end up as empty drives. They were obviously playing in chase mode for the majority of the game. And with those decisions, rather than putting points on the board, we're pushing for the touchdowns and then get them on 3rd and 4th downs that were pushed into longer than they should have been because of penalties. So that was kind of a misleading element to the box score last week. You can point to the Chiefs coming off of a overtime game on a short week, now turning around and needing to cover a bigger number at home. And I think there's a bigger argument to be made that the Chiefs are just not a team right now that's built to consistently win and cover by margin. We saw them fail to do it against the Raiders. We saw them fail to do it against the Buccaneers. If it's a Chiefs team that is less than a field goal in a competitive game, a pretty attractive bet. But once they get north of a touchdown, it's becoming harder to lay those numbers with the way that the offense is operating, where they're kind of forced into manufacturing points rather than creating a lot of explosive plays downfield. And if you're looking at that and you're pointing to the divisional aspect of this game with a short total, I could see justification for the Broncos in here. But I don't think that either of those arguments can be a compelling enough case to justify this number being anything other than Chiefs minus 8. I think it's priced where it should be. I think it's priced where it needs to be, and there's not a whole lot that I can look at in this game to entice a bet on one side or the other. Big Ross says Denver has to maintain a positive game script or Nick's deficiencies start exposing themselves. You see that a lot, kind of in every game that Knicks plays. I know that there was a run in the schedule where national media kind of latched onto him and was comparing him to Jaden Daniels, and there was a lot of excitement about him. But when you're playing the Saints defense down several starters and the Panthers defense that's been as bad as it has been, and the Raiders, like, you're going to look like a pretty good quarterback. You step up and start playing great teams, playing from a negative game script, you start to see how limited that Broncos offense is. So yeah, that's kind of my take on Knicks. And you say good luck against that KC defense. I think it's a really tough matchup for him for sure. Michael says KC an all-time teaser leg. They're probably going to be the most popular teaser leg of the season. I would expect. Connor agrees with the Chiefs teaser leg, and Sam is pointing out an AFC West teaser leg companion to that with the LA Chargers. I would agree with both of those. I have a comment on the Chargers coming up in just a second. I'm going under with the first sip of the coffee that's been sitting here for a while. So it was 35 minutes on the scoreboard. We're at 31 for the first sip. It's costing me about $7 an hour to drink that cost. Man, the prices. I don't know how they keep getting away with it. They just, every time you go, it seems like it's a quarter more. And it's just, eventually someone has to revolt a little bit. Speaking of, that's a good segue before we get into the Niners. This is very like niche commentary. I'm fascinated. Canadians will maybe know of the story. The Curtis 403 versus Molson Canadian Beer Corporation is one of the more fascinating stories, I think, of the entire year. I'm not a big news guy, but I can't get enough of this. And for those of you who do not know the context to the story, there is a guy named Curtis who watches every Toronto Maple Leafs game in full gear, helmet, shoulder pads, everything, like full on dressed up head to toe, and live streams himself watching Maple Leafs games. And he's very, very popular. And he watches it from his basement that he's turned into this like Maple Leafs fan cave of like epic proportions. And he created, I still don't know how this happened. He partnered with like a small town brewery in Alberta, and they created a beer. And the beer became so popular that it was starting to get into liquor stores potentially in Ontario. The long story short is, because of the live stream and him drinking his own beer, which he created, he's watching these streams, Molson has sent a cease and desist that is stopping him from doing any of his live streaming, because I guess they felt threatened that his beer was going to overtake, they're the biggest beer company in Canada, his beer was going to bite into their sales. And now there's this big like unfurling of people expressing legal opinions. But Curtis made this promotional video where he was leveraging him wearing the Leafs gear. And I guess on his beer dispenser in his basement, he had the Leafs logo on it that he used in a promo video to sell the beer, which he was shipping nationally door to door. And so it's turned into this big thing where it's this, I don't know, he's probably like 40, 45 years old, just this random guy in Alberta who's live streaming Leafs games. And now the biggest beer company and the liquor company in the country is going after him because the beer that he created is now biting into the sales of Molson. And so I'm blown away by it. So, and speaking of revolting against specific prices, it's a wild story if you have time to look it up. And he, I think he had to shut down all the social media from streaming. And so I know everyone's focused on other news stories today, rightfully so. But that was one that I spent some time looking at this morning, as I have no interest in the other stories that are going on. So that's something to, if you're bored today and you want to look at, take a look at that one. San Francisco -5 with a total of 50.5 on the road at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I'm intrigued why the Bucs got bet yesterday. And I don't know what was behind it. I don't know what drove the move, because everything about this week for the Niners coming out of the bye suggests that this is kind of the season reset for the late year push. There's a chance that McCaffrey is going to be back at practice with an outside chance to play. Debo and Jennings have a chance to return. I mean, this should be everybody for the 49ers offense almost back up and ready to go. Now, when that number was posted, I looked at it and I'm like, that's kind of enticing for me to think about San Francisco. This has now come in a 1.5. This was as high as 6.5. What I don't understand, and I'm saying this a couple times this week because it's a bit of a weird week in terms of why things are moving and what's behind it. When I think about the Buccaneers, they have played 2 games since they have lost Evans and Godwin. And I think you give Liam Cohen a lot of credit for what he's been able to do from an offensive output perspective the last 2 weeks. 6.0 yards per play, and then 5.7 against Kansas City, 430 yards of offense against the Falcons, just shy of 300 against the Chiefs on Monday night. When I think about the Chiefs specifically, the biggest deficiency that they have on defense is defending running backs and tight ends. It's been a weakness for them for a long time. It's a big weakness for them this season. When I think about what the Bucs have been doing without those 2 wide receivers on the field, it's attacking the weakness that Kansas City has. And so even though that game ended as it did and the Bucs get the cover, it was kind of a good matchup for the Bucs in that spot against the Chiefs defense. Very similar case for the Falcons. Baker Mayfield was not pressured. They could get the run game going. They could get the backs involved, and certainly Cade Otton was involved as well. So it was 2 really good matchups in those spots. That's not going to be here against the 49ers defense. And I can't help but wonder if this is a spot where we're seeing kind of the last week and a half of Buccaneers kind of tailwinds here from the injury and the offensive outputs driving this number a little bit. I don't agree with it. And I don't agree with it down to -5. And so with that said, I like the Niners in this game at -5. And I don't know what was driving that move down in favor of the Buccaneers. Like, I don't know how you can look at this game at less than 7 and be even with the rest advantage. Like, I don't know what's driving. It's a very similar case to the Giants. And at times, honestly, when I don't know, it gives me some hesitance because I'm missing something. And so I think like the Giants-Carolina game, I'm missing something here with the Niners and the Bucs, but the Niners at 5, got to bet it. Got to bet it. New England on the road at the Chicago Bears. The Bears are 6-point favorites across the board with a total in this game of 38.5. I have no opinion on the side, no opinion on the total in this game. If this does get a little bit lower, I may be inclined to bet the Bears. What I don't know about Chicago is what type of effort you're getting on either the offense or the defensive side of the field. And when it comes to laying this big of a number, there's a lot of uncertainty that comes with that. Why I say that is last week there were very strong indications that the Bears were potentially on the verge of quitting. There were rumors about locker room issues with Eberflus that came out of the Washington game in terms of personnel that was used near the goal line that upset a lot of players on the offense. That carried over into the Arizona game where Stevenson was benched for leaving practice. The Bears still have Kyler Gordon and Brisker dealing with injuries. They still have 2 offensive linemen dealing with injuries. And DJ Moore this week had an interview where he did not confirm that the locker room was not lost. It was presented to him, has Eberflus lost the locker room? And his answer was, I wouldn't say no. And so, I mean, you're putting all of this together, and it's a question of what is going on in Chicago. When I look at this game specifically, if you told me at 9:40 a.m. on a Wednesday morning that it was a non-issue, the Bears have their own line back, the Bears get those 2 starters in the secondary back, I'd be looking at 6. And I'd say I kind of want Chicago in this spot because they're going to be able to run the football against the Pats defense that's struggling to stop it. And defensively, this was a Bears defense that, depending on the numbers and the stats that you were looking at for a very good chunk of the season against decent competition, not great, we're putting up some very good numbers. And I'm not putting the Pats higher than a lot of the offenses that the Bears have looked very good against. I think this game, if you give me full effort on both sides, could play out for the Bears similar to how it played out when they faced the Panthers and were able to get the run game going and play with tempo and speed things up. But with all that said, I have no idea what you're getting on either side from the Bears in this spot. And so it's a tough game to look at and a tough game to bet. When the bet came in earlier in the week at 7 on the Pats, it was a lot of injury news behind that drove that bet down, that I was able to figure out and ask what was going on. And that was what drove that down. And as I'm looking at this here, I need to know more from the Bears before I could do anything and have any confidence in it. So I again, it's another game where I don't have an opinion, side or total in this spot. Nice comment here from Lucid, who says, "Thank you. I enjoy your show multiple times a week. I appreciate your information without the over-the-top yelling and negativity present on so many other shows." Not a lot to be negative about when you get to watch, bet, and talk about football every week for a living. So I appreciate you tuning in. I know this week the info has been a little bit substandard to what it typically is, just with everything disrupted. And so I appreciate everybody for bearing with me through that. And as I said, as the week goes on, I'll do my best to update everything that might come up, and I'll use that comment section down below. So if you are watching, be sure to come back later in the week. Check out that pinned comment, as I'll update anything that pops up in the spot as well. Anthony says it's a bad spot for New England, back-to-back road games. Defense was on field all of overtime too. They definitely were. And I mean, the Titans O-line just wore down that defensive front by the time we got into the fourth quarter. That was dominant from Tennessee up front. And that's a reflection. Like, Mayo's calling the defense soft for a reason. We saw how soft they were in that spot. Kevin wants CFL playoff picks. At bettingtalk.com last week, I posted Ouellette under 71.5 rushing yards. He basically did nothing all game until he had the big 30-yarder. And then he was at 73 when they were running out the clock, and he lost 3 yards on his final carry and finished at 70. And so it stayed under at FanDuel. DK was 68.5, went over. There was the middle on Ouellette that was unintentional. So depending where that was bet, it was split down the middle on that. Let me honestly, I haven't looked at a lot. Give me the I know the Riders injury report is gigantic this week. I haven't been paying a lot of attention. I know the TSN guys are coming in next Saturday, and there's apparently a dinner planned, and so I'm looking forward to that. And I wish that was this week. I could give some more info from what's going on and some insight. Maybe there's some props next week to come from that. Riders +4. Argos +1.5. Give me both dogs this week, and that is a very uninformed take, but I'll take both dogs this week. Questions about what is this? Robert says, anyone know who the bettor he referenced that sent out the Redskins? Redskins was Hitman, Robert. Redskins was Hitman. I can't remember if he played 2.5 or money line. I believe it was 2.5. Tennessee at the LA Chargers. Chargers a 7.5-point favorite. Total in this game is 38.5, trending slightly lower towards 37.5, which is the consensus number at most spots across the screen. I would have I'll call it a lean here in this game to the Titans at 7.5 on the road. And it is not something I have bet. I've seen this flicker 8 a couple times, and those 8s got taken out right away. I don't know if those are going to come back. If they did, I would probably be inclined to take Tennessee at 8 or better. I was very impressed, and it's tough to be impressed against a Patriots defense. But as I mentioned, the way that the O-line was able to just wear down the Pats defensive front, even with the backup center in the fourth quarter and overtime once Cushenberry was ruled out, the way that they were able to get push up front and just rely on the run game. Pollard coming back off of injury looked great. You'll get Spears back this week, so you have both backs. It should be a game where the Titans run the football effectively, which is nice to have when you're getting more than a touchdown with a dog that can run on the road. And I think it can potentially work against the Chargers. Now, defensively for Tennessee, been very good up front. And I think about what the Chargers want to do at their core. It's run the football. We've seen a very different Chargers team the last couple of weeks as they get near the top of the league in pass rate over expectation. Now, I'm not falling for it again, looking at this total. It's getting a little bit shorter. They're going to have to throw the football against Tennessee because I don't think the Chargers can run on this Titans defensive front. And it's going to become a question of, can the Titans win up front with a little bit of pressure to offset some of those great throws that Herbert is making consistently on a weekly basis to remain competitive in the game? We saw receivers come back for the Chargers last week, which was a big positive, and this team continues to throw the ball way more than expected. They have to stick with that in this game, in this spot. But when we start to think about how there's no home field advantage here for the Chargers, and you're getting north of a touchdown for a team in LA that is winning games and they're covering, and they are covering by margin, but it's a lot being driven by just holding opponents to very low outputs. You need a lot to go right here as you get north of a touchdown. And again, like they beat up on the Browns and Winston 27-10, hold them to 3.8 yards per play. Game stays under and they cover. That game was a pick'em game against the Saints, a team that was going through all the injuries, switched quarterbacks in game, 26-8, another game that stayed under, and they end up covering. Against Arizona, it was another tight spread. Against Denver, similar scenario. And so the Chargers are now going back home, stepping up in a bigger role, and I think we see them tested to cover this number by the Titans offense, which will keep things going on the ground, shorten the game even more. And if this is not another perfect game from Herbert, I think it's a lot for the Chargers to get outside the number. Now, when I talk about why I haven't acted on Tennessee yet, Cushenberry down with an injury, he's going to be out long term. Although they still had push up front with the backup, there was some snapping issues. And we saw that in overtime with the fumble, a couple high snaps as well that Rudolph was able to corral. So I think that's a negative. Diggs is lost for the season. We still don't know what's going on with Snead and the injury. And there was a report that came out yesterday that said the expectation is for the Titans this week, it's going to be a very, very long injury report again. So anytime this has got to 8, there's been Titans money coming back in. Lots of uncertainty with some of the injury report stuff going on around Tennessee that I'm just waiting to see what happens with. And again, when I'm talking about that pinned comment in the thread, keep an eye out for that later in the week, because maybe there is something to get involved with when it comes to the Tennessee Titans later in the week. Speaking of another game that fits that mold, here are the Philadelphia Eagles, a 7-point favorite on the road at the Dallas Cowboys. Total in this game is sitting at 42 across the screen. There's really not a whole lot that needs to be said about this game. Dak Prescott is out. He's going to miss extended time going on IR. You have very uncertain and unclear expectations for CeeDee Lamb and his ability to play in this game. We still don't know what's going on with Micah Parsons. We still don't know what's going on with Diggs. Those are two massive names for the Cowboys on defense. The other big injury to watch, obviously, is A.J. Brown for the Eagles. This game was sitting around the Eagles -3 when the Prescott injury hit. The news came out, and we've seen an adjustment of about 4 points. This got as high as 7.5. The 7.5s were taken out. We're back to a flat 7. As I look at this currently, the one stance that I've been trying to put home all week on the podcast is the drop from Dak to Rush is not nearly as wide, in my opinion, as it has been warranted to be in recent years. Rush has replaced Dak a couple times throughout his career. There's a lot of familiarity between Rush and the offensive system, which, I mean, at this point, what is the offensive system? I don't even know what it is for the Cowboys, but obviously familiarity with the team. There's familiarity with the scheme. And Dak this year and his lack of mobility, I think, devalues the drop in terms of the switch to Rush as a backup QB. When there was that big mobile element with Dak's game in the past, and you take that away, that was a big loss that kind of pushed it. And you're like, okay, you can get to a 6-point adjustment like we're seeing with elite quarterbacks in the league to backups that are relatively unproven. But I don't think that is the case anymore. And so when we're talking about 3 through 7, that's big when you're accounting for the value of all of those numbers. Now, if you told me that Lamb is better than 50-50 and Parsons is in and Diggs is in this spot, I would very likely side with the home dog, especially if A.J. Brown would have a chance to miss in this game. But I don't know any of those things to be true. And they have a massive impact on this. If you take A.J. Brown out of the Eagles offense, my trust in them to cover north of a touchdown on the road is very low. There is a sense that I get that there is a mountain of money waiting to fade the Philadelphia Eagles at some point. I don't know if that is going to be this week with so much uncertainty with the Dallas Cowboys and what we're getting. We've seen kind of nibbles once this has got a little bit higher, but there's a spot brewing to where it's just early week money piling in against the Eagles, and then we see late week follow-ups. It doesn't seem like that's going to be this week. There's just a lot of uncertainty as to what we're getting from this Cowboys team with so many injuries. And so that's keeping me on the sidelines in this game. But I think that is worthy of mentioning in this spot. And again, in terms of games that could be updated later in the pin thread, this certainly fits that bill. So if you are watching, be sure to come back Friday and Saturday and look at that pin comment here on the video to see if anything was updated or changed. New York Jets as a pick'em on the road at the Arizona Cardinals. I like the Jets here. We released the Jets as well earlier this morning. This is a good spot for New York, in my opinion. The Arizona Cardinals, the last couple of weeks, really, if I'm looking at the Cardinals, great game against Miami, but there was a Dolphins defense that was down key starters up front, key starters in the secondary. The Bears game last week, which we talked about earlier in the show, a lot of quit being shown from the Bears. I don't think that win at 29-9 looked as good as the scoreboard necessarily wants to make it look, because you're really devaluing that win against the Bears. The game against the Chargers, again, 17-15, narrow win at home. They were outgained in yards per play. They were outgained in total output by a lot. They gave up 440 yards to the Chargers in that game on defense. And then the Packers, again, it was another 400-yard concession on the road at Green Bay. And so I don't believe that this Cardinals defense has suddenly turned things around in the last 2 weeks. And it's an offense I've been very high on for the duration of the season, going back to preseason and some of the bold predictions. But again, the last 2 weeks, I mean, it's come pretty easy against those defensive opponents. The Bears down multiple starters in the secondary, the Dolphins without a couple starters in the secondary. Right? Like, there's been opportunities for this offense to get right. This is a big game for the Jets, obviously in context of the AFC, but it's a big game matchup-wise for the Cardinals against these Jets corners. It's competition they have not seen in the last several weeks in terms of opposing corners that they are going to be facing. The one advantage that Arizona certainly has is on the ground from heavy personnel running against this Jets defense. As I have the Jets in a bet this week, like, my biggest fear here is you're watching the screen. Here's the line of scrimmage. Here's the first down. And you see the Cardinals offensive line 10 yards down the field and James Conner running free behind it several times throughout the game. Like, I think that's so in play for everything that the Cardinals want to do on offense in this spot. And the Jets just don't have an answer to stop it. And I'm also very worried about Kyler Murray scrambles in this spot. The Jets need a very good defensive game plan to come up with ways to contain this heavy personnel look that Arizona is going to run on them. I don't know if they have the answers for that. That is a very legitimate concern in this. But the fact is that outside passing attack downfield, I don't think is going to be as effective for Arizona, which, if the New York Jets can get ahead on offense, which I absolutely think that they can, that's going to force Arizona into not being able to use those looks that they can lean into to dominate this game. And I think that is a big advantage for the Jets. A couple things that we have seen from New York the last couple of weeks is more tempo. They have not been nearly as slow snapping the football at the line of scrimmage. They've sped up. I think part of it by realizing, since the play caller switch to Downing happened, that it's not a way that this offense can operate, taking 35 seconds snap to get the ball off. I mean, it was just setting them up for terrible situations. But what we've seen from the Jets offense the last couple of weeks, since the play caller switch, since some of the changes were made, 6.7, 5.9, 5.9, and 5.5 yards per play. And that game against Houston was kind of throttled back a little bit because of how the Jets handled things in the first half, which was completely night and day from what they did in the second half. And so I do think the Jets offense being a little bit undervalued. They get a defensive opponent here in the Cardinals. You think about some of the defenses that they have faced so far. I mean, the Pats twice you can put on the side with how soft that they've been, but it's still Houston and DeMeco Ryans and that pass rush, which has given the Jets trouble all season long. It was the Pittsburgh Steelers, Mike Tomlin and that unit, which has given teams across the league trouble all season long. It was the Buffalo Bills and Sean McDermott. Defense is playing to a very high level. Minnesota Vikings and Brian Flores, blitz, pressure, that's trouble. The Denver Broncos in pouring rain for 4 quarters, and that was before some of the offensive changes were made. And then you also had the game against the Niners and Titans, 2 teams that are very good up front. The Arizona Cardinals are not in the same class as those opponents. And so this is a spot here to where I look at the Jets here, and I think this is a good spot for sure. Ed asks, where do you get your tempo numbers from? So the easiest place to get them is from team rankings, but you're getting a raw tempo rating from team ratings. You're not getting an adjusted tempo rating. And of everything that I am asked and want to answer, that adjusted tempo is not something I'm really in the place to talk about. But I would say, rather than hearing it from me, if you want to search into some adjusted tempo metrics when it comes to football and how to calculate them. I hate giving this answer, but I know it's something that we create internally that I just don't want to be put on the spot to share, but there's ways to look at adjusting for tempo, removing garbage time and things like that. But the easy answer is the raw tempo number comes from team ratings that you can find. Team rankings, pardon me. But yes, so we do some adjustments to that number to make it our own and gauge things differently. Last 2 games, Sunday Night Football, Monday Night Football. Detroit Lions -3.5 at the Houston Texans. We talked about this on Sunday night during the live stream and the reaction to the opening odds of Week 10. And I was obviously pretty adamant about Houston. That was 4.5 and 5 at the time. We are now at 3.5, and it's changed a little bit. I like Houston in this game plus 3.5. But what I want to caveat that with is that this game at 3.5 now, as we're sitting here Wednesday at 10 in the morning, is different from what we were talking about 4.5 Sunday evening at 5 p.m. It's different, obviously, because the number has changed. But it's also different because of some personnel changes. The biggest is that the Lions added Smith. That fixes their defensive, I don't want to say fixes, it helps negate the big issue they have on the defensive line. And I think it helps the defense at some level with the issues that they've been having the last couple of weeks that have gone kind of, I don't want to say unnoticed, but it's been back-to-back 400-plus yard concessions by the defense. And then it was 385 against the Vikings the week prior. It's been bad since Hutchinson has gone down. 7.5 yards per play, 6.5 yards per play, and then 6 yards per play in 3 games since. So Smith is going to help with that. And so that makes things a little bit different. What I was leaning into Sunday was this is Texans coming home with extra time to prepare, getting 4.5, which was a number that was jacked up from the look ahead, adjusted up for the Lions, who are struggling on defense, but they're getting away from special teams victories. They're getting away from big plays and turnovers. And now they're laying this big of a number on the road. It just wasn't a good spot. And I also like the fact that Houston could get back Nico Collins, Al-Shaair, get back Anderson, right? There were a lot of positives. And I was like, this is all coming together for just like a great spot against an inflated number. And so now we're lower. Smith has been added, and we don't know about Nico Collins, and we don't know about the defensive guys. On Monday and Tuesday, everything was very non-committal from the Texans staff. And so like other games this week that we're talking about when it comes to the Bears, when it comes to the Titans, when it comes to the Eagles, Cowboys, there's 80, I saw a tweet, there's 88 players who have a specific threshold of fantasy football value who are on the injury list this week. And Nico Collins is at the very top of that in terms of the impact that he would have coming back. And so at 4.5, the reason that I liked that earlier in the week was if you're taking 4.5 or even the fives that were out there when we were doing the live stream, if Nico Collins doesn't play, this game was not getting to 6. And so you're taking that 4.5 at a number where if Collins is out and the defensive guys are out, it's very unlikely, in my opinion, that was going to close worse against you than the 4.5 or 5 that you were taking. At 3.5, if Collins is out and you get maybe one of the two defensive starters in and the other one misses, like this is going to 4. This is going to get back a little bit. And so there's risk now at the 3.5, where earlier in the week when we were talking, if you're taking that price and the injury news doesn't go your way, it's not as big of a negative because you probably weren't getting worse of it. Now at 3.5, you can take 3.5. The injury news doesn't go your way, and you're on the wrong side of the close. So that's something to keep in mind if you're looking at this at 3.5. Just that there is certainly some risk in that you're going to be looking at taking. Now, if Collins is in and you have those other two guys starting, to me, this game closes 3. I think that's what you're looking at, even with the addition of Smith. So that's how I would still look at this game and what I would think. But this is a big reset spot for the Texans at home on Sunday night, and I think we get a big effort from them against this Lions defense in a big way. Ed says, so Collins worth a point. I mean, I would say Jefferson won in terms of impact to the team. Who are you putting above Collins outside of that? AJ Brown is close in terms of like direct and immediate impact. I'm not talking about receiver talent here. I'm talking about importance of that player to the offensive scheme. It kind of goes back to, like, if we go back 7-8 years, there was always debate about like how much is a running back worth, and the consensus was always like half a point or less. But then you would have Cowboys games where Zeke in his prime was taken out, and it just completely changes the entire offensive scheme and system. And so even though it's going to be like the fundamental rule of like how can a player be worth more than half a point, or how can he be worth a point? Like there's certain players that I think are so important and so impactful to the scheme that when you remove them, it becomes a completely different offense. I think Collins is in that like elite top tier territory. I mean, he was front runner for offensive player of the year, the league's leading wide receiver before he went down with the injury. And the splits with him on and off the field for CJ Stroud so far in his career, I mean, are massive. And so, again, I will agree to disagree, but this is a spot to me where it's massive for him being back. Last game on the board is the Miami Dolphins on the road at the LA Rams. We released Miami plus 2.5 earlier this morning. That is the reason for the questions that were being asked about why did the number move. That was us earlier this morning as we released it, and then that brought all of the 2.5s down to a flat 1. I could see this settling at pick, but I think we're kind of locked in this range. We were waiting to see if there were going to be 3s that showed on the board, and there were a couple books that we have as indicators that were leaning away from the 3, and that was good enough for us to go and act on it. Some internal numbers that we had made this game at a pick'em. We're also looking at a couple of other sources that had this as Miami minus half a point. There's a lot of noise between what you're trying to grade the Dolphins as currently versus what they were preseason coming into week 1. And the reason that I referenced that time frame and that point is that was really, you think about how early in the season Tua was injured, you kind of want to go back to those dates for reference points. And I think it's even more so important in this game because the Rams are in a very similar situation to the Dolphins, where it's now been 2 games that the Rams have been back to their kind of preseason form because they suffered all of those injuries to their wide receivers after the game in week 1 and then early in week 2. And so if I go back to week 1, when both of these teams were at full strength, the Dolphins were rated 1.5 points better than the Rams on a neutral field. If we're looking at current aggregate ratings before last week, and the results that happen as we're waiting for them to be published this week, the Rams are listed as just higher than 2 points better than the Dolphins is what we should see those come out as right now. There was a range of them where some were as low as 1.25 better, but the teams have flipped in a pretty big way. I don't agree with that flip, and I think the Dolphins are being undervalued, and I think the Rams at home potentially is being a little bit overvalued as well. And so I think there's ratings on both of these teams are a little bit noisy and being treated in the wrong way, which presented, I thought, a decent spot with the Dolphins in this game on Monday night. There's also the element of the Rams coming off of the game at Seattle in overtime in the division, coming back home. They put up just 4.4 yards per play against that Seahawks defense. Were outgained by a yard per play. They had the couple red zone interceptions from Geno that took points off the board. They had the big 103-yard pick six that I think made them look a little bit better than they were. They got the fourth down stop in overtime. Gerard's listening to this going, please stop again. It's a little bit of a misleading win last week for the Rams in that game against the Seahawks. And even in that game against Minnesota, where everybody was back, it was a Rams team that was outgained by 1.2 yards per play against the Vikings as well, even though they come away from that game with the victory. So kind of misleading results both ways last week that I think inflated this number a little bit more than it should have been, and was looking at this as a spot where I think the ratings are just not quite getting Miami right. In terms of motivation, obviously both teams need to win. I'm not going to buy into that too much, but when you think about the season being on the line here for the Dolphins and you're getting that offense indoors on turf with everybody healthy to speed up, I do think that that's an advantage as well. So that's what we did at 1. I don't dislike it, but you're getting certainly a different look at this current price. So to recap, as we look through the card, had that long shot prop on Mitchell for tomorrow. That's kind of a big flyer that you can do with what you wish. Giants, Carolina, just don't know there. Like the Colts at 4, Minnesota, Jacksonville was a stay away. Like the Steelers at 3. Said Saints 3.5. I see that as now 4. So there was pure disagreement with that. But Saints 3.5. Denver, KC was a stay away. San Francisco at 5. New England, Chicago was a stay away. Titans, Chargers, stay away. Eagles, Cowboys, stay away. Like the Jets at a pick'em. Houston was leaning there at 3.5. Titans were that lean at 7.5. And then Dolphins we released as well earlier today. So that will do it for NFL week number 10 here on the live stream. Before we go, if you have any questions, I'll take a few minutes, answer any things that you want to look at. Devin Barth says you got a couple nice prices from the Sunday night show, including this one. That Jets-Cardinals total also, I think, stood out in quite a big way for anybody who was listening to that show. Same thing with the Texans higher as well. Ed says, thank you, Adam. Awesome info. Glad you enjoyed it. Any questions that you guys have, let me know. We'll take a few minutes here before we wrap up. Got through everything in just over an hour, so it's good time for the day. If you have any questions on here, let me know. John Wilson says, Kevin O'Connell plus 900 coach of the year. Ooh, let me pull up that market. I have not looked at coach of the year market in about 7 or 8 weeks. And so I am curious to see. I would say initially my first thought is, I guess the Vikings were quite underrated coming into the season. I was going to say, what is the surprise value of O'Connell in terms of turning that Vikings team around? And I would say it's probably fairly high if we're looking at it. Why do I not see? Here we go. Season awards. Coach of the year. Dan Quinn 2-1. Sean Payton 750. Never. Campbell 750. Reed 750. Tomlin 850. O'Connell 9-1. Jim Harbaugh 12-1. Raheem Morris 15-1. Matt LaFleur 16-1. Why does Jim Harbaugh kind of jump out to me at 12-1? I mean, if the Commanders keep rolling, Quinn's going to get it. There's no question. First year head coach with the massive turnaround for the Commanders, elite offense. I mean, it's going to be tough to contend with that at the way it's going. I I don't buy Sean Payton being in there at all, and I think the Broncos are the most phony team in playoff contention. I think they have the playoff spot currently, if I'm not mistaken. I don't buy that at all. I think Campbell would be tough to win it, given that they were so good last year. I get the argument for Reed amid adversity. Tomlin's always popular as well. There's something about Harbaugh stands out to me. Like I kind of buy into the Chargers making the playoffs being more of a surprise or viewed in a different way with just how much he's been publicized, maybe a little bit more than O'Connell. That's my like snap reaction. I don't think you're wrong to look at O'Connell at 9-1. I don't know if I don't know if the votes are gonna be there for him unless the Vikings finish on just a ridiculous pace to end the year, which they might, but I kind of feel like Harbaugh draws the attention in that spot. Devin Bart, did the Chiefs go undefeated? No, they do not. Ed says, I have a Daniels to win Offensive Rookie of the Year at 5-1. Can I count that as a win or too early? As long as he stays healthy, you're good to go. So you're just rooting against injuries. Nino says, need a survivor. What do you think of Chargers? Someone out there that matters likes the Titans a lot. I say that because during the release procedure this morning, the Titans jumped in a hurry, and that's usually pretty telling. And that is not a negative for your Chargers survivor to say the Chargers are not going to win. But I thought that was pretty interesting to see that amid all the injuries that the Chargers have. If I hate survivor questions only because I don't know the context of your league or who you have or what you're trying to save. But if you're just asking me, like, pick a team that is going to win outright on the money line this week, and it can be anybody with no restrictions, I would have a hard time not taking Kansas City. That's what I would say. But the Chargers would be up there for sure. Bryce says, hit the like button before you head out. Helps the video. Yes, it does. If you enjoyed the video, you can hit the thumbs up, or you can use the subscribe button as well, which helps out a lot. Preston says, you mentioned you use multiple power ratings. Which ones do you use? A ton of them. Pull in several. If you're looking for something yourself that you can use, Sam Hoppen puts together aggregate power ratings every single week for the NFL that can be very useful. So if you just want an easy source that you can use for yourself, I would go find his tweets every week and look at those. John says, Kevin O'Connell doing it with Darnold. He is. Like, I'm not taking away from that and the turnaround. I'm just, if I'm putting myself in the shoes of the voters and you get to the end of the year, could Minnesota hang on and win the North? Possibly. We'll see. But I think it's more realistic that the Vikings enter the playoffs as a wild card team. The Chargers are going to be in the same spot. So you're comparing both of those. If Quinn and Washington continues, it's a runaway. We don't really even need to have this conversation. But if it comes down to O'Connell or it comes down to Harbaugh, I think Harbaugh gets votes in that spot. Asked for teasers this week. Again, any basic strategy teasers, if you can play them at 120 or better, are good. There's not much I can offer there. I wouldn't tease Philadelphia down. I saw a question about that. So I would avoid that in a teaser if you have that as an option or you were considering it. That was not one that I would consider if you're looking at Eagles 7.5. That is one I would avoid. But any of the others that fit the basic strategy through the 3 and the 7 are ones that I would look at if you can get 120 or better. Crazy Croaks, does Philly win the division? It sure seems like the Eagles are just teetering on the edge of a bit of a meltdown and a collapse. But I'm just pulling up the Eagles' remaining schedule to see. There's something going on there with Philly that I don't quite fully understand with the coaching staff and the decisions that are being made. Massive game on Thursday against the Commanders. Rams in LA, Ravens in Baltimore. Panthers is a win. Steelers is going to be tight and competitive. Commanders again. Cowboys are probably well out of it, and then the Giants. So you're looking at realistically 3 more wins on that schedule, including the Cowboys, which would get them up to 9, I think, as a floor. I would expect higher than that. When you're looking at the Commanders, Steelers, Eagles, Cowboys, Titans, Saints, Eagles, Falcons, Cowboys. I mean, it's woof. That's about as smooth sailing as it gets the rest of the stretch. So those two division games obviously going to be massive in terms of who decides that. I'm not presenting anything new, but certainly when you're looking at the schedule, putting me on the spot. I don't know what the odds are for that division off the top of my head. I'm going to pull that up as well, as that's a good question to look at. What is it being priced as? Eagles minus 145, Commanders 110. I'm not betting the Eagles at minus 145 to win the East, if that's what you're asking. I'm not doing that. Crazy Croaks, I have a $50 parlay to win 660. Cash out is 316. Thursday's game is basically my bet. I don't know what you're betting on or what you're looking at or what the details of the parlay are, so that's a bit of a tough one to answer. If you want to put that in the chat, I can do my best to answer that one and maybe give you some advice. In general, when it comes to cash out, you're making a bad decision to do it. If the amount of money that you're looking at is not gonna be a big deal for you or your account, I don't want to say that is or isn't for you specifically, but the vig and cash out options is usually very, very high. That makes it tough to justify. I see. So you need the Eagles to win the East, and all your other division winners are looking comfortable. I mean, just let it run. I'm not cashing that out unless you're looking at the $316 and you're like, I need this to go bet something else right now. I'm letting that run every time. Chase says Lions look like the best team in the NFL right now. Houston doesn't look the same without Nico. Do you think the Lions win easily this weekend? I do not. And that's especially true if Collins returns this week. If you tell me Collins is back and the Texans get their defensive starters back on the D-line and linebacker and they're healthy, I'm looking at a Texans win. So I don't think the Lions win that easily at all. No, I do not. EH, does Lamar keep pace with Geno for most passing yards this season? Not at the way that the schedules and the standings are trending. No, I don't believe so. I think we see the Seahawks, especially if they get the O-line sorted out ever. It's crazy to me that they can't figure out some fixes temporarily on the offensive line as they just keep getting battered. If they ever fix the offensive line, I mean, I think the passing output only increases. But think about the Seahawks down the stretch. Niners, Cardinals, Jets, Cardinals, Packers, Vikings, Bears, Rams. I mean, half of those games just have shootout written all over them. And you're going to have the Seahawks, who are still like the Seahawks bottom of the division, but Cardinals 5-4 leading the way, Seahawks 4-5. I mean, it's living or dying with Geno every game down the stretch for Seattle. So I don't see a spot where the Ravens are going to have to flip that and keep cruising at this output the rest of the season, especially week 15, 16, 17, given their stance in the division. Like Seattle's just in such a different spot. So I think the divide becomes bigger as the season goes on. Dietz says, any chance you can walk us through what a Sunday through Monday looks like for you? Great question. And this probably goes to show how disrupted everything is right now. So Sunday morning, waking up, I'd say I get going now at about 5, and it's anything last minute, trying to get bets out, anything that might be worth actioning on. Basically, we have a team chat with Slack that is always open. There's all the different channels for all the sports. All the researchers, originators are all in the different channels, which they're assigned to and covering their regions. And then we have bots pulling in all the info. So we're constantly evaluating everything. So anything last minute that happens on Sunday morning, we're acting on that collectively. Once the game starts, it's pretty quiet other than like updates going into the chat. So we're all watching different games, anything that we see, injuries, tempo, notes, change of philosophy, anything will get noted in a big Slack channel. I'm doing a couple games, and then once the 1 p.m. games, the early starts end, I'm going through the box scores and the play-by-play for all of them to put together all the data, to put together all the write-ups. Those write-ups go partially back into Slack. A version of them goes out to Betting Talk for the recap. And those usually get me finished by, it used to be around halftime of the later games. This year, I've started using a lot of AI tools to help me watch and summarize everything that is going on. So now it's basically by the end of the first quarter of the 425 starts, I have all the early games summarized, done, all the play-by-play sorted, anything odd or misleading pulled out. I have all the injuries summarized. And basically, I'm watching the next 3 quarters of the late games, catching up with the first quarter of what I missed, which I'm usually caught up in by halftime. And then in the second half, doing anything of last-minute prep for the games coming up, as well as pulling in anything that stood out or that needs to be like kind of highlighted as actionable for the next week. Once the afternoon games at 4 end, that's when I go live with the live stream. So I recap everything I just watched, recap everything that I took away from the notes. Then I do the live stream. There's the reaction to the next week's opening lines that I do here, which is kind of my first go through and look at it. Once that is done, back into Slack. And usually it's around like early first quarter of Sunday Night Football, do an initial run through all of the games coming up for next week. We circle anything we want to bet or release, kind of have like good 2 numbers and what we're looking at. So it's a run through the card. There'll be people at that time, including myself, that are submitting write-ups. This year, a lot of the write-ups are being submitted privately. In last year's season, we had everything kind of publicly shared. Now it goes more private, and then it's shared later on. Watch Sunday Night Football. If there's anything after the game, that's like 8:30, 9 o'clock, then that'll get kind of summarized. We'll go through it quickly internally and see if there's anything going on. From basically 9 to 10, it's like anything last minute, catching up. There's some newsletters and some other outlets that start posting at that time. So I'm pulling those in now to some AI tools to scrape those and read them for me. So then I can wake up and just have all my notes summarized for me without having to read it and then do it myself. I've started printing those off, and then I just reread them in the morning as I'm having a coffee to catch up on everything. So Monday gets going at like, but now with college basketball, it's about 5:30. And there's now a lot of focus on college basketball. So like the Monday mornings are a little less intense in terms of the conference calls and going through all the games and going through all the teams. But by about 7 a.m. on Monday, we have a short list of sides, a short list of totals, and it just becomes market availability for when we want to look at releasing those. Those get sent out typically between 8 and 9 a.m. Pacific time. And then after that, it's kind of like the first exhale that's happened since Sunday morning, the previous day. From that point on, it's like we've actioned all of the stuff that we want to take advantage of at that point. And then Monday for me is catching up with all the podcasts that come out, catching up with all the team sources and the columns that are written, catching up with all of the like aggregate and national media writers that I follow. I don't want to say national in terms of like national stations, but like in terms of covering the entire league. So I'm aggregating all of that information, seeing anything that I missed. And then the rest of Monday into Tuesday is just handicapping games, going through game by game, making different notes. And these are the games we haven't really bet on or looked at yet to see if there was something missed or something that we're not looking at. Monday, we get all of the numbers from different models that we sourced pulled in. We get some internal numbers updated as well. And it's just working through the card the rest of the day on Monday, working through the card the rest of the day on Tuesday. If there's totals being released Tuesday morning, those will go out. And then by the time we get to Wednesday morning here, we basically for the week released everything that we want to. For the most part, anything that has been bet has been bet. And between now and Sunday morning at kickoff or at 5 a.m., it's just keeping up to date with all the info, watching everything that happens, figuring out if it's worth betting on, and just evaluating everything that comes through. And that basically starts from tomorrow onward. So once you get to Thursday, things are pretty well set. There's obviously injuries all day Wednesday, injuries all day Thursday, injuries all day Friday. It can lead to making bets and differences, but That's kind of what happens on those 3 days. My media now is Tuesday afternoon is with Mitch and Paulie at VSiN. I do the Sam P video in a couple of minutes. I do this live stream Wednesday. I do the podcast every morning that goes live at 2 a.m. Pacific. And so those are uploaded. And then other than that, now there's, like, from my perspective, with so much focus of the entire team going to college basketball, which I'm not doing this year. For the most part, Thursday, Friday is a lot of focus on just other content, media, some stuff on the product side as well. And so that is what kind of looks like for the full duration of the week. So it's pretty intensive through all day Sunday, all day Monday, all day Tuesday, and then into Wednesday. It's pretty aggressive. And then Thursday, Friday are a little bit, I wouldn't call them slower, but it's less reactionary and less actionable on those 2 days. And so that's kind of what we're looking at. Now, if you flip gears and go to college basketball, the day that I described on Sunday happens every single day, with the only kind of reprieve being Friday afternoon, with some of the slower days you get on Fridays. But I mean, with the Saturday 130 game cards, I mean, conference calls are starting Friday at 6, 7 p.m. So you think about doing that every day for 4 months. I mean, that speaks to the volume of the info that the guys are doing on the college basketball side. So that is pretty intense and pretty impressive to watch. Yeah, Ryan, service stuff. Also doing a lot of, we're trying to expand things further and grow into different audiences and different markets as well. The betting and the private betting side is a massive part of RAS, but there's also obviously the service and growth side that applies to that, and both work in tandem. And so trying to grow that one side is where I spend some time during the week, especially on later in Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday as well, as things slow down a little bit NFL wise at this time of the year going forward. So that becomes a bit of my focus, and then is a big part of my focus in the off season as well. So that's a big part of it too. Crazy Crow says you should take your audience to work day. That would be unreal. We've talked about it a lot, of like publicizing some of the calls that we do, some of the handicapping, like working through the cards that we do. It's something that I would love to have published and shown. I think it would be a big eye opener to what goes on behind the scenes. Even just the calls where there's betting going on as well are pretty incredible to be a part of. And I would love to do it. There's hesitancy, obviously, given some of the stuff that's shared on those calls, that is tough to do, but that is something I would love to do and hope we can do. Lee Teat says, I had to put that silly name on the screen. Didn't realize I was logged into an old account. It's all good. All right, that'll do it for me. I got to jump over to do the show with Sam P quickly. I appreciate everybody for stopping by. Again, I'll have the updates in the pinned comments down below the rest of the days going into Sunday as well, with anything that's added in addition to this show. So if you want to keep coming back and checking that out, that will be where any updates are posted. Hope you guys have a fantastic Wednesday, a fantastic day. Enjoy NFL week number 10. We'll chat to you bright and early again tomorrow, 8 a.m. Pacific, 2 a.m. Pacific time, 5 a.m. Eastern time on the podcast. See you then.